Hope you are all doing it. In my previous video, we have discussed about land exploitation. As we are discussing about the foundational chamber in the stowocratic system, so I'll just give a small intro about the stowocracy system. So stowocracy is a meritocratic ecocentric system which has 5 filtering chambers. So in this system, even in order to become a political candidate, you have to go through those 5 filtering chambers. Only if you get approved by all those 5 chambers, you will be selected as a political candidate. Then you have to face the election. If you get the majority of the votes from the people, then only you will be considered as a steward, not the leader. So this intro for the people who didn't watch my previous videos yet. So among the 5 filtering chambers, the first chamber is called foundational chamber, which includes land, air, water, soil. So under that land category, there are subcategories. So far we have discussed about deforestation and land exploitation, which is in my previous video we have discussed about Congo. So in this video we're going to discuss about urban expansion. Okay, got it? So foundational chamber has multiple subcategories, which is land, air, water, soil. So under this land integrity chamber, we are going to evaluate deforestation, illegal land exploitation, habitat fragmentation, and this reckless urban expansion. This video, we're going to discuss about urban expansion, okay? So this is the blueprint of the stowocratic system. So if you want to know the system as a whole, as a blueprint, you can just buy this book from my website. I have given the link for the book in my video description below. As an ebook, you can buy it. As a paperback also, you can buy it. But I encourage you all to go for ebook. Okay, so anyways, let's go to the topic. So in this video we're going to discuss about urban expansion. Got it? How it is affecting our planet and why it is mandatory to give importance to it. So first of all, in order to understand about how this is affecting our current lifestyle, it is absolutely understandable that we can't even think about a life without without depending upon the nature. Absolutely, that is the truth. But we have to look back at our history, how our ancestors led a life completely depending upon the nature, yet they preserve the nature. Yeah, absolutely. The growing population is all fine. Okay, once we discuss about the urban expansion, you will get a wholesome idea like where we are failing like that. To know where we are failing, we have to look at our past history, how our ancestors used to live, how they led their life. So before getting into the topic, I want to tell you this. No matter who tells us the good thing, we can take it, okay? All the discrimination in the name of, borders, in the name of this and that, language, in the name of culture, we can keep all those things aside, okay? No matter who is that. If anyone is telling us good, if it is good, we should be ready to take it shamelessly. We need not to be ashamed of it, okay? If anyone is trying to teach us good, we should be ready to take it. So let's keep all those borders and all those discriminations away. So let's get into the topic. Ancient people completely believe that a life is impossible without water. So they established the house closer to the water. So they lived within the proximity based upon the availability of the water. So like next to the river, like close to the river, close to the pond, that's how they established their houses. But they didn't build their house too close to the water resources to avoid mosquitoes, to avoid the floods and all those seasonal issues. The house setup were in such a way they adapted to the topography. They didn't go against it. For example, if they didn't eradicate a mountain to establish their house, in fact, they merged with the nature. They surrendered to the nature. So they built their houses, against the mountain cliffs to catch the sun and to avoid the freezing winds. Also, they made sure they lived close with the resources. For example, if they are a hunter, they lived close with the moving parts of the animals. They followed those paths and also they followed the ripening seasons of the wild fruits. They were farmers. They settled where the soil is loose and fertile, mostly close to the river floodplains. Also in those olden times, they didn't have the access to all this kind of modern shipping stuff that we are having right now, like trucks and this and that. They didn't have that, right? So what they did, they used what they had. For example, to make the framework of the house, to get the shape of the house, they used the bamboo, teak, and all those things they used, and young tree saplings, because it is easy to bend, right? It won't break, right? So they used all those things in order to make the framework of the house. For example, in places like where they didn't get the access to the trees and all those stuff, so they were depending upon the mammoth bones and whale's bones to establish the framework of their house. The floor of those houses mostly, like packed down tightly by, hundreds of footsteps by stomping on the very raw earth. That's how the floor of the houses used to be, just the floor. That's it. The earth. That's it. And for the walls, what they did is that they used, they wove a mesh of, hazel or branch of willow. That's what they used. And then they plastered it using mud, clay, a mixture of mud, clay, and animal dung is what they used in order to, make it, sturdy enough. And once they dry it in the sun, it becomes so hard, it became windproof, and it became an insulating material. How it works is that during the daytime, what it does is that this clay and mud house absorbs all the heat from the atmosphere. So inside of the house won't feel hot. Got it. But in the night time, what happens is that exact opposite thing. This mud wall releases all the heat it absorbed. Okay. So nighttime, you won't feel the cold. You will be, you will be warm. You will be feeling warm inside the house. So the walls itself acted like a temperature regulator. So how beautiful is it, isn't it? So during the daytime, you wouldn't feel the heat. During the nighttime, you will get the warmth because of the same mud wall, right? Talking about the roof is made up of like dense layer of river reeds and dry grasses. They were using all those things, and heathers and palm tree leaves and coconut tree leaves to make the roof. So the well thatched roof not only kept the interior warm, but also it prevented the rainwater from dripping in. When we talk about the nomads and semi-nomads, they won't be settled in one place, right? They will be keep on traveling. So for them, what they did is that they use the animal skins like bison skin and all those kind of skins in order to make the roof. Talking about the floor of those houses was just bare earth. They just tightly packed it with hundreds of footsteps to make it tight, to make it soft, to make it hard. Sometimes they used ash, clay, and animal dung also in order to stop the bugs from burrowing up. The entire house setup of our ancestors was in such a way eco-friendly. That's what I say. They didn't dictate the earth. They surrendered to the earth. Not only their way of living, even the housing setup, you see, this is how they lived. And so when we talk about the nomads and semi-nomads, their housing setup was in such a way it was travel friendly. They use the animal skins in order to establish the house, in order to, temporary house, so that they can fold it and carry it along with them. In the center of the house, they had fire pits to get the warmth, to keep the predators away, to cook the food. So this is how the storage worked in our ancestors' time. And that is also one of the reasons why they had a healthy life, because they didn't, store the food for a long time. Only when they need, they just go for hunting, or they go for, harvesting, or they go for collecting, gathering. That's how they function. That's why they lived a healthy life. In those ancient times, they literally lived, ate, and slept next to each other. If they establish a one mud house, at least like 3 to 4 generations, they easily live. They wouldn't be, in internal segregation inside the house, like this is one room, that is 2 room, like this is this stuff, this is storeroom, like that kind of stuff. It's just one simple open dwelling house. So they slept next to each other. So all those kind of, modern terms like privacy, this room and multiple rooms, all those things are like modern day terms. And they didn't live a sedentary lifestyle. They were completely depending upon, physical heavy hard works in order to even lead their life. For example, in case of hunting, they have to go for hunting. In order to go for, collecting the grains, they have to get their hands in the mud and they have to work. When we talk about working in the house, in order to make the food, they have depending upon the heavy materials, like they have to use the stone pounder and all those kind of stuff in order to make a food. Lifestyle was completely active. They didn't lead a sedentary lifestyle. They chopped wood, they tanned the animal skin for the sake of clothing. They had an active lifestyle. Their life itself functioned in such a way. They literally lived their life. They ate and they took good rest. So that's how they lived. They had a deep, ecological intimacy, I would say. They know the animal sounds, they know the bird sounds, they know the plant's name, they know the effects of those plants, beneficial effects and the side effects, and all those things they know. And it was carried from one generation to another generation through oral wise, when they sit next to the fire pit, they all talk about these things, like from the stories to the wisdom to the intelligence. Everything was carried out from one generation to another generation through words. If the wind smelled a certain way, they knew that storm was coming. So they lived in complete harmony with the nature. They lived completely aligned with the nature. They segregated the land itself in such a way according to the landscape. When we talk about the Tamilians, so for example, when we talk about the Tamilians, they segregated the land itself in such a way based upon the landscape, based upon the availability of their resource, based upon the landscape, they segregated their land. And according to their landscape, they adopted their housing style. Let's say if it is a mountain region, they adopted their lifestyle and their housing setup in a certain way. If it is a forest region, they adapted their housing setup in a such a way that it aligns with the forest topography. So that is how they established their house and they lived in harmony with the nature. So we will discuss about Tamilians and we will discuss about Japanese in this video. Okay, when we discuss about Tamilians, they literally segregated their land based upon the landscape and the availability of the resources in that particular land. Okay, that's how they segregated their land, and based upon the climatic condition of that particular place, they segregated their land. And also Japanese, based upon their landscape and the availability of the resources, they also segregated their housing setup and their way of living into 4 different categories. See. So starting with the Kurinji, which is a mountainal region, which includes, like high mountains, dense forest, and terrains, rocky terrains, all those, comes under this Kurinji category. So they have to make sure their house setup is in such a way that aligns with the landscape of this mountainal region. Okay, so since it is a mountain region, their housing setup was in such a way that their huts were built with the support of the stilts, okay, or it was like small cabins nestled into cliff sides. Okay, so that is how their house establishment was in the Kurinji region. Most of the people who lived in this particular landscape of this place, like mountain regions, or hunters, animal hunters, or gathering honey. So that's how they led their life. Okay, so their housing setup was in such a way. Okay, it wasn't like eradicating the mountain and establishing a house. They surrendered to the mountain. That is why their huts or their cabins were set up in such a way that it don't disturb the mountains, but it aligns with it, that it combines with the mountain. Okay, Kurinji people are living in the mountain region, right? So they are highly prone to these animal attacks, so wild animals attack. They lived in tiny clustered settlement. It wasn't like here and there. It wasn't dispersed way. So they all lived in a tiny clusters in order to protect them, in order to be supportive for each other. So mountain region people, they survived by collecting honey, or by hunting wild animals, or by cultivating the mountain millets. So that's how they survived. So in order to establish their house, for the framework of the house, they use the bamboo, they use the wood to establish the framework of the house. They thatched the roof with wild forest grasses or with the teak leaf. So that's how they thatched their roof. So that is how their house establishment was happening in those times. Moving on to the next category, which is called Mullai. Shrubby forest, valley, and woodlands. Okay, all those things comes under this category. So this is the landscape of this Mullai region, which is like literally forest region, which includes shrubby forest and green valleys and woodlands. So the life of these people revolved around the animal husbandry. So these people are mostly herders. Okay, main job is that they are herders. Okay, their life completely revolved around the animal husbandry, like herding cattle, goat, sheep. Okay, so they have to make sure, now you see, they are raising the animals with them. They have to protect their livestock animals. For that, what they did is that they established their house in such a way, in a circular pattern. Okay, multiple huts, mud houses in a circular pattern. So in the center, they had a fence, heavy thorny fence. Inside this thorny fence, these cattle, all these animals were corralled. Livestock animals were corralled. Circular housing setup didn't only protect the livestock animals which they raised, but it also protected these people from the wild animal attack. Okay, so in order to make the framework of the house, they used the forest twigs, and in order to plaster the walls, they used the mud and cow dung, clay. They used all those stuff. So that is how they established their house, and they thatched the ceiling of the house using the wild grasses or local straw. And also for the flooring, they used the red mud and cow dung. So that is how they established their house. So they were depending upon the mud, and they were depending upon the straw, and for the forest twig, okay, and forest Marutham. So moving on to the next category is that, which is the Marutham. Fertile river valleys, which is next to the river banks, comes under this category. Wetland, paddy fields. So how these people were herders, right? Like that, these people were mostly farmers and they were depending upon the rivers for the survival, for the sake of agriculture purpose. So the foundation of the house itself, very well raised in order to protect their house in case of flood, in case of the natural calamity. And the houses of these people often featured with, like open courtyard in the center of the house in order to dry their grains, which they got from harvesting through agriculture. So in order to dry that, their housing setup usually mostly came up with large courtyards inside the house, open courtyards, and their house was made up of like bricks, clay. The roofs were layered with like straw. Moving on to the next category, which is Neithal. These people live closer to the sea areas. So the coastal region comes under this category. So the primary job of these people mostly is like fishing. Since these people live close to the sea, which is highly prone to the storms, so they have to establish their house low to the ground to avoid being ripped apart by the storms. Okay, so for the house framework, they used the palm tree trunks, and they thatched the roof using highly densely braided palm tree leaves. So that protected them from these kind of salty air, and also it protected them from the heavy rains using the palm tree related stuffs. Okay, it's based upon the availability, based upon the climatic condition, based upon the weather, based upon the landscape. This is how they adopted their life, their work, their housing setup and everything. Palai. So the desert region comes under this Palai category. Actually, that is not a literal desert region. In fact, this is a dry land of the Kurinji and Mullai, which had dried because of severe drought. People in this region aren't like permanently settled in that place. They were actually shifting from one place to another place. Like they were mostly nomads or semi-nomads. Since they have to keep moving from one place to another place, they kept their housing set up in a minimalistic way. Their tents using the thorny brambles and coarse hides. So all these people, they beautifully segregated their land based upon the landscape, based upon what they have, they established their house, and based upon what they have access to, that's what they were depending upon for their survival. Their job was depending upon it. See, they didn't erase a mountain to establish their house. They didn't erase fertile land in order to do the agriculture. They utilized what they had. But look how modern days house establishment is happening. We are destroying a mountain in order to build a house. We are destroying the mountain in order to get the stones. We are destroying a house in order to get the cement. Right? So that's how it is happening. But look at these people. The landscape was in such a way, they built their house using what they had the access to, and they lived a healthy life. That's the point here. But now our survival is happening by destroying the nature. So we have to learn this way of living from the ancient Tamilians. Look how beautifully they segregated the land and how beautifully they established their housing setup based upon what they had, based upon the climatic condition, based upon the landscape of that place. That is why no matter which country you live, no matter which language you speak, if there is anything good, that we all should be ready to take it. Okay, so now moving on to the Japanese. They also established their house in such a way, they lived a life beautifully aligned with the nature. So ancient Japanese community have split their geography into 4 different categories, and based upon that, they adapted their life. Okay. For example, let's consider this as a mountain. Okay. So imagine this as a mountain. Okay. Now this mountain is classified into 4 different categories. Okay. This is one category, and this is one category, and this is one category, and what comes here is another category. Okay, this is the land. Okay, so what comes here is another category. So now this upper layer, upper region of this, which is a highly dense forest region, which is the upper region of the mountain, which is highly packed with dense forest. Okay, so this region was called as Okuyama. So this region was called as Okuyama, which has a dense forest, which is the uppermost region of the mountain. So people were highly restricted from cutting down the trees from this Okuyama region to go and build a house or live there. In order to protect the watershed, in order to protect themselves from the soil erosion, from the landslides, they didn't touch this forest region. Okay, region was untouched by the human beings, and they didn't build the house in this place, Okuyama region. So now moving on to the next region, which is called as a Satoyama. It's a secondary forest. They consider that as a secondary forest. So they practiced coppicing, which is like cutting down the branches of the lowest part of the tree so that they grow back so faster instead of completely destroying the tree. So they practiced coppicing for the sake of because they need wood for the fire, for the charcoal purpose. So they practiced that instead of instead of killing the entire tree, they practiced coppicing just only by cutting down the lowest branch of the tree. Okay, so this is where human interacted with the forest sustainably. So this is a region between the high peak and the flat valley. Okay, the region is like we can say like this is where the mountain meets the flat valley. Okay, this is where the mountain meets the flat valley. My bad, I said it wrong. So this is mainly used for the sake of agricultural purpose. Well, so this region wasn't just used for the sake of agriculture, but it was also designed like an artificial wetland in order to observe the monsoon, heavy rains, preventing massive floods from the downriver. Okay, so this is how they used it. And now moving on to the next thing is what the fourth region zone is what called as a Satoumi. So this is where the rivers meet the ocean. Okay, so this is the region where the river meets the ocean. So this region was called as a Satoumi, which is like a coastal region, which is similar to the Neithal in the Tamilian segregation. Harvested the seaweed and fish without damaging the coral reef. So now talking about where Japanese established their house in this classified setup is that they established their house between the Satoyama and the agricultural plain. So they didn't completely establish their house in the plain flat valley nor in this steepy mountain zone. They established their house between these two things. So now they had the access to both the forest and also the agricultural plain. So this is where they established their house in the borderline of the Satoyama and the agricultural plain. They didn't completely move to the flat region or to the slopey region. Okay, so now this housing setup is what called as a minka. So the roof is thatched with the grass called kaya, and the framework of the house was made using the timber, and it was plastered with the mud, like how we saw in the Tamilians setup. Okay, and the roof was incredibly steep in order to drain out all the snow, in order to drain out all the rains that is falling on the house. So it was made in such a way that it aligns with the nature, that it aligns with the landscape of their region. Okay, they didn't go against the nature. They lived in harmony with the nature. They surrendered to the nature. They didn't dictate the nature. And did you see, they didn't even touch this upper mountain region, because they know if they touch this region, their watershed will be affected. They have to face the soil erosion and landslide. Look at the intelligence of our ancestors. They were the intelligent ones. Now how we are establishing our house? We are establishing our house by completely destroying the nature, by eradicating the trees, by eradicating the mountain, by eradicating the water reservoirs, by destroying the rivers, by destroying the ponds, by destroying the lakes, by destroying the spring. We are using heavy tractors, heavy machines in order to completely dismantle the ecosystem in order to establish one single house. Ring or PVC pipes, we are using the plastics, we are using the heavy chemicals, we are using the cement, and we are using the asphalt, which is all preventing the water from being absorbed into the soil, which is being a root cause for the flood, which is also killing our groundwater level. Now in the name of urban expansion, in the name of building the roads, in the name of establishing a house, in the name of building house, in the name of establishing a road, we are killing the ecosystem, we are killing the nature. These ancient peoples, they all know they need this nature, they need this ecosystem, they have to live in harmony with this nature. They shouldn't dictate this nature. So they were all intelligent. It wasn't like they didn't know how to establish a housing setup like how we do today, because they were the ones who put the detailing in the architecture, in the buildings. So it is not like they aren't capable of destroying the nature and establishing a greedy, self-centered life. So it is not like they didn't consume the nature. They consumed the nature, but in return what they dumped as a waste to this nature was degradable. But nowadays what we are doing, almost 70% of the water is being consumed by the meat and dairy industry. Almost 41% of the forest every year we are destroying for the sake of the beef industry. for the sake of beef production, for the sake of cattle ranching. We call ourselves apex predator. Apex predators don't go to the store and buy the meat. They go for hunting. We are not apex predators. Our ancestors lived in such a way, they did hunt the animals, but they lived in harmony with the nature because they didn't build a huge buildings that destroy the ecosystem. Okay, they hunted the animals, they ate the animals. I'm not denying that part. But their housing style, their way of living, their lifestyle, everything was in harmony with the nature. For example, let's see, 15,000 liters of water is being consumed to produce 1 kg of beef. Then imagine 15,000 liters of water. Consumption rate should never override the restoration rate. But what we are doing today, we are completely dumping the waste. We are completely using this earth as a dustbin. We are completely destroying the resources of our earth. Almost 72% of the water is consumed by the agricultural meat industry. 20% of the water is consumed by these kind of textile and heavy manufacture industries like textiles, fashion industries. These are the ones who's consuming, and fossil fuel, these kind of energy sectors are consuming 20% of the water. Meat industry is what consuming this 41% of our forest every year. We are destroying 41% of our forest every year for the sake of beef production. That is the hidden cost that we are all paying, but we aren't paying enough attention, and these animals aren't even efficient energy converters. To be honest, if you give me $100, I'm just going to give you $3 in return. Would you consider that as a profit? That's how these animals work. Because if we human beings also eat, we consume most of the energy for our survival. Then only for our functioning. Then only the rest will be stored in our muscles. So that's how animals also function. Now 15,000 liters of water is what consumed to produce 1 kg of beef. So that is what in urban expansion, in stewocratic system, we are going to look at all those things. Let's have a close look at it, okay? Though the earth is covered with 71% of water, that 97% of water is salt water, which is ocean water, okay? It is ocean water. Only 2.5% of the water is what? Fresh water. Only 2.5% is what the fresh water is. So even in the 2.5%, in that 2.5% of fresh water, almost 68.7% of water is trapped in the form of glaciers, in the form of polar ice. So anyways, which is melting and which is merging with the ocean water these days because of the global warming, because of the rise in the temperature of this earth. So which can't be used by the human beings because it is getting merged with the ocean water. So which can't be used. Mining 30% of the water is, highly trapped inside the deep underground. So which can't be used anyway. So deep ground, which is, so only 0.007% of the water is what? Is renewable and accessible for the human beings. From this 0.007% of fresh water, almost 72% goes for the meat and agricultural industry. That is what consuming the high amount of water. So which we spoke in my previous video in the deforestation, under the deforestation topic, which is almost like 41% of the forest every year we are destroying for the sake of beef production alone, for the sake of beef industry alone, which almost sums up for 4.5 million hectares of forest we are destroying every year for the sake of beef industry. So even in terms of water, highly water is consumed by the meat and agricultural industry is what highly consuming the water, 72%. So which is said that by 2030, which is almost like within next 4 years, almost 4 billion people, almost half of the world population will be facing severe water stress. We are going to face severe water stress. Okay, almost 4 billion population. Almost 4 billion of the people in this earth are going to face the severe water stress. So by 2030, almost 4 billion population will be facing severe water stress. By 2040, almost 41% of the agricultural land will face severe water stress. Okay, which means the cost of food is going to increase as hell, and cost of food production, cost of the rice, cost of the wheat, cost of the groceries, cost of the vegetables is going to skyrocket as hell by 2040 because of the water stress. Okay, by 2050, which is almost like 2050, which is almost like 24 years away from now, almost 51 countries and union territories, okay, will be facing the heavy water stress. Okay, also by the time of 2030 itself, a massive displacement will be happening. It is said almost like 20 to 700 millions of people will be, moving from one place to another. They will be displacing from their homelands because of the water stress, because of the water scarcity. They will be moving from their homelands. Heavy water consumption, heavy deforestation. The main reason behind these things is meat industry. Main reason is beef production. So that is what. So all these things why we are discussing is that we are failing to live in harmony with the nature. So by literally building these kind of houses, we are literally stopping the rainwater from recharging the groundwater level. So all these rainwater is just getting washed away with all these kind of pollutants, with all these kind of pesticides that we are using in the agricultural land, and these kind of oil toxins and all the pollutants and all the filth, all the dust, all the crabs, all these things are getting washed away and it is getting merged with the ocean water, sea water. So now we are not saving the rainwater. So now the groundwater level is also decreased as hell. So by 2030, within 4 years, almost 4 billion population, 4 billion of people, almost 4 billion people will be facing heavy water stress because of that massive displacement will happen, which is going to happen. So this is what. So now we are not letting the groundwater to get recharged through the rainwater. These rainwater are getting merged with the ocean water, and meanwhile the glaciers is also melting and merging with the ocean water. So now we are already facing the water scarcity. In future, it's going to reflect in our day-to-day life in a massive way. So that is why urban expansion is not something different, separate thing from these kind of stuff, because the urban expansion plays a very important role in how the groundwater is getting recharged, how we save the rainwater, how we store the good water, right? Just because we have the PVC pipelines, are we going to get the water tomorrow? No. Only by protecting the water reservoirs which we have right now, only by protecting the ponds, only by saving the rainwater, that's how we can sustain, that's how we can protect ourselves. So that is why Stewacracy tries to bring to the table by putting strict restrictions over the urban expansion. So that is what we are trying to change through the Stewocratic system. So don't think, okay, what is the purpose of like pulling me away from the democratic system or autocratic system and trying to push me through another system, which is a Stewocratic system. So the intention is not to push the human beings to the another system. Actually, Stewocracy main intention is to push the citizens towards a self-reliant life. It is not a system built to protect the citizens through the government. It is a system built to protect the citizens from the government. So that's what it is about. So that's what, like without ecocentrism, I don't know, like how the life is even possible. Just by putting the human beings on the pedestal, how we can bring the change? That's completely absurd, right? We can't bring the change just by changing the laws. If the law is going to consider the ecosystem, maybe that will click, because we are not in a prevention phase to sit and think about all those things. We are in a puncture phase. Like I told you, just look, within 4 years, almost 4 billion, or almost half of the world population is going to face a severe water bankruptcy, is going to face a severe water stress. So which is no joke, right? So that is what Stewocracy is trying to, protect citizens from. Is not something that is unachievable. Is not something that couldn't be achieved. It can be achieved by unity. Actually, that is what I said. It is not a system built to protect the citizens through the government, actually from the government. That's to put it in simple words. So that is why we have the 4 filtering chamber, because you might spend a lot of time just for example, let's take a tree. We are going to spend a lot of time in order to raise one tree, right? But within 2 minutes, within 3 minutes, they are just going to bulldoze the tree away. That's how it is happening, right? So right now we need a protection from these kind of system, right? So meanwhile, So that is why, meanwhile, go for the self-reliant life. Make sure you choose your life which is mostly self-reliant. Make sure you, meanwhile, I'm not saying only after the stowocracy it is going to be possible. Make sure from now itself you make sure that your life is a self-reliant life for everything, for the sake of water, for the sake of the basic need, for the sake of shelter, for the sake of food. Make sure slowly change. Small changes, okay? Bring the small changes. Make sure you're moving towards a self-reliant life. It is, if you are going for a life in which we are not going to talk about the borders, in which we are not going to talk about these kind of this and that, that's all fine. But that's kind of, if this is the normal way of living, now we are in an extreme opposite side. So in order to pull back from that extreme opposite side to the normal way of living, to the natural way of living, which is a normal way of living, in between we need a stepping stone, right? To jump from that extreme to this normality, right? So that is what the job of stewocracy. Consider stewocracy as a stepping stone in the middle of the ocean, okay? In the middle of the two sides of the river. So now you need this stepping stone in order to jump from that place to this side. Okay, I'm not saying go for the stewocracy forever. No, actually, we don't need a system. That is what I'm talking about. In those olden times, did they have a system? They traveled to any country they want. They traveled to any place they wanted. They didn't say, okay, that country needs a visa, that country needs a passport. What are we even talking about, right? So in between we need a stepping stone to go from that side of the river to come to this normal side of the river, which is a normality, which is how the life should be. So that is the job of the stewocracy. Stewocracy is a middle stepping stone. In case, if possible, I would say, just if it is possible to jump from that side of the river to this side, just like that, go for it. But as of the condition now, in between we need a stepping stone. So that is the thing of this stewocracy. I'm not encouraging any system, like go for the system. What do you mean by system? We don't need a system. Just live a life. So, okay. So in order to bring the normality, we need an in-between stepping stone, which is the job of the stewocracy anyway. So anyways, I'm ending this video now. So I'll meet you with the next video. If you find this information useful, please share about the stewocratic system. Talk about this stewocracy with your friends, share this video, explain it to your friends, because the more we get to know about stewocratic system, the more we unite, the more it's going to get easy, right? So that is what from my side I'm asking. So speak about stewocracy. So, and also go for the ebook, okay? Unless you're going to use my book quite often in order to teach others, if you're going to use my book as a reference quite often, you can go as a paperback, or else just buy the ebook and carry it in your phone or carry it in your laptop, okay? So yes, talk about stewocracy with your friends, share this video with your friends. So go for the self-reliant life from now as much as possible, okay? So yes. So the intention of stewocracy is not to push you from one system to another system. It's a stepping stone. Okay. So yes, see you in the next video. Until then, it's Sayue signing off.